Thank you for joining us today. We will start in just a minute or two to allow for any late arrivals. Thank you. Welcome to Data-Driven Best Practices for Donor Management. I'm Jason Ankeny, Civis' Head of Content Marketing. A few housekeeping items to begin today's presentation. First, this webinar is being recorded. Audio can be streamed over your computer or by dialing in via phone. Codes are in your webinar confirmation email. A question and answer session will conclude today's presentation. You can submit questions for our speakers via the Questions tab. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please access the Help tab. And finally, if you have any additional questions or suggestions, please email us at the address on your screen. Now, let's meet our speakers. Anna Chen is an applied data science lead at Civis Analytics, where she leads custom projects and relationships with nonprofits and advocacy groups. She helps organizations democratize their data so insights are available to those who need them. Previously, Anna worked with media, finance, and retail companies through Civis's commercial practice and at Analytics Operations Engineering. In addition, we're joined by Ben Kirshner. Ben also serves as an applied data science lead at Civis and leads custom projects and relationships with nonprofits and advocacy groups. He helps organizations, especially those in the environmental space, leverage data to understand and grow their donors and supporters. Previously, Ben worked in political media at Politico, where he co-architected their data strategy. Thank you both for joining us today. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jason, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. Ben and I are excited to share the tools and best practices that we've learned throughout our time working on managing donors with our nonprofit partners, and especially taking some time today to highlight some free and publicly available resources that you can access. We'll share findings from our recent analysis on charitable giving trends in 2020, then go in depth on tools that you and your organization can use, and wrap up with some next steps and suggestions on how to get started, including the announcement of our survey research giveaway that we are launching today. Before we jump in, we want to take a few minutes to introduce us, Civis Analytics. We were founded in 2013 by members of the analytics team for President Obama's re-election campaign on the idea that the tools and methodologies that worked for the campaign would provide value for all organizations, businesses, governments, and nonprofits. All of our work, from the technology we build to the survey research we field to the custom analysis we offer, is designed to put the power of data into the hands of decision makers so they can make the best choices for their communities. Civis brings objective data-driven truth to organizational decision making, all the way from the boardroom to the world's largest social causes. Our mission, quite simply, is to do good, bringing our expertise in data science, survey research, and technology to bear in delivering truth to our clients. We're committed to working with our nonprofit clients to amplify their work across a wide range of causes, including public health, education, human services, the environment, and philanthropy. Speaking of philanthropy, we'll now dive into our analysis of giving in 2020. Starting with publicly available data, the Giving Tuesday organization reports that they've seen year-over-year growth. In particular, their online donations have increased 4 times from 2015 to 2019. And on the latest Giving Tuesday in this December, they reported a 23% increase in participants over the number of participants on Giving Tuesday 2019, including a total of 16.8 million total donors. With that background in mind, over the last year, Civis has run national polling on charitable giving as well, which allows us to look at how trends may have shifted among different demographic groups. For example, we see that those living in rural areas in particular have been self-reporting lower levels of giving as we move through 2020, while younger respondents have maintained their level of giving over the past year. We all know that the events of 2020 have shifted many things in our lives, and in particular, we can see that that shift has impacted which causes people have chosen to support and how that's shifted over time. In particular, at the end of 2020, we saw an increase in donations toward hunger relief, neighborhood and community funds, and healthcare and medical services. This isn't surprising, given how we know that people have rallied around their communities as a result of the pandemic and lockdowns. But it does mean that while some organizations have received more grassroots support this year, others might have received less. All of which to say, nonprofit organizations have been impacted in different ways by COVID-19 and everything else that's happened in 2020 and the first few weeks of 2021. Depending on where your organization is, the challenges you're facing when thinking about your donors aren't the same as what other organizations are facing, and also might not be the same as challenges you've faced in the past. You might have a lot of new donors that you're figuring out how to engage with, or you're deciding how to re-engage with the existing donors in the context of the pandemic. Or you might be planning a large public campaign to increase awareness about your issue in the context of everything that's going on. Regardless of where your organization is, everyone is struggling with this new normal and without access to some of the traditional tools you may be used to using. However, at the end of the day, donor management boils down to understanding who people are and how to talk to them. And what we want to share today are some common tools that any organization can use to leverage data to inform how you approach the challenges that you're facing. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Ben, who will kick us off with some tools and best practices related to first-party data.
Thanks, Anna. As Anna mentioned at the outset, we're going to now talk about 3 general types of data that are available, as well as tools associated with each, and how you can leverage them toward data-driven donor management, especially answering those 2 questions that Anna was just talking about, who your donors are and how to talk to them. So for each of these, we'll share what it is, some ways we recommend thinking about it, available resources, and a few examples from our work. I'll kick us off by talking about first-party data. First-party data is a really valuable resource to understand your supporters and how they engage with you. What is first-party data? First-party data is data that is collected or generated directly from your interactions with donors. So it could be gifts, transactions, actions your donors are taking, subscriptions they have to your lists. It could potentially be demographic data or other web behavior that you are collecting directly about your donors or from your donors. Generally speaking, first-party data is going to be the highest quality data because it is directly generated from those interactions you have with your donors. Increasingly, a lot of the source systems that you may be using, for instance, CRMs like Salesforce or web analytics platforms like Google Analytics or social media platforms, are all making first-party data increasingly available through APIs or native reporting for analysis. What that means is whether you are thinking about it or not, your organization is likely sitting on significant data about how new, potential, or longtime supporters engage. And that data is a huge resource for moving towards data-driven donor management. So let's talk about a few best practices for how first-party data alone can generate some actionable insights. First, it's important to have a well-scoped research question. Rather than try to look at your entire customer or donor journey from the start, maybe think about one aspect of the donor funnel and where you might be seeing particular drop-off. Next, it's important to have a shared understanding of outcomes and use. Why are you doing this analysis? How will it help your organization? What decision in particular is this analysis geared towards helping? It's also important to have agreed upon definitions. For instance, what does it mean for a donor to lap? In the case of agreed upon definitions, there is no right answer, but it is really important to have a shared understanding so that everyone understands and is able to consume the outputs of the analysis. It's also important to have frequent communication among stakeholders. One way to do this is to check in the analysis to make sure you're on the right track and confirm what you are seeing. If something looks off, maybe it's worth checking an assumption or seeing if someone has an understanding so that you don't just go away and come back with something that is not what everyone thought they'd be looking at from the beginning. And lastly, it's really important to have clear documentation and make sure the analysis is discoverable so that it actually gets used. That means having it live in a place that people can find it and use it, but also having the context necessary so that people don't misuse that analysis. Let's now take a look at an example of a first-party data analysis using transaction data alone. A large disaster relief organization came to us with a theory that disaster donors, those are donors that donated directly to a specific natural disaster or other disaster, behave differently from blue sky donors. That would be donors that give outside of specific disasters. Looking at just transactional data, we were able to learn that a large portion of donors whose first donation was in support of a specific disaster relief effort established ultimately a pattern of annual giving. That's what you're seeing in the chart here. Conversely, those that gave outside of disasters often didn't end up donating to specific disaster responses. From this, the organization was able to make decisions about how to cultivate different donors and when and how to make certain asks of donors. And again, I want to emphasize, this was just from transactional data, but it was important to agree on things like, what is a disaster donor? What is a blue sky donor? What does it mean to be both? So that when we presented the results of the analysis, everyone was on the same page. So the good news is that there are a lot of analyses that you can do, like the one we just talked about, with only your first party data and discrete data sets. The less good news is that there is a difference between having data and having usable data. Usable data is data that is ready to answer any of the questions you want to ask of it. And that's not the same thing as just having data. Data scientists, data engineers, like the ones at Civis, can tell you that this is where the bulk of our work lies. And as you see here, the data landscape is only becoming increasingly complex. One of the biggest challenges we typically see with nonprofit organizations in terms of having data versus having usable data are data silos, which present a lot of problems for donor management, particularly in understanding how your donors are interacting across your whole organization. Often when working with nonprofits, we see multiple different teams working with multiple different source systems. That could be teams working with a CRM like Salesforce, email platforms, SMS, offline or events, digital, the list goes on, and you may be familiar with some of these source systems. But what this ultimately leads to is data silos that could be across teams, across systems, across functions, or across offices. That said, there is an upside, which is breaking down data silos can greatly expand the value of your first party data. Now, I will say that breaking down silos could be the subject of a complete other webinar, and unfortunately we don't have time to go into too much depth as it involves people, technology, and even cultural change. But what we do want to do is provide a couple of ways from a data perspective to think about breaking down silos, and then I'll talk through a few examples. One way is to just ensure that everyone can understand and access the data that you have. And a simple thing that you can do in this regard is standardize and document data sets. Standardized and documented data sets will help increase collaboration among and across teams because stakeholders understand what they are looking at and how to use it. Another way to think about breaking down silos is resolving or unifying different data sets. So if standardizing and documenting data sets is about providing just additional context around what data you have as it currently stands, resolving or unifying data sets might be looking at ways to combine data sets based off common identifiers. That is really valuable in that it can ultimately generate a better understanding of your multi-channel donor journey, or what we call a 360-degree view of your donors. Both of these together, ultimately, and this is the goal of what we're talking about here, can lead to optimized fundraising through data-driven decision-making. Excuse me. With that, let's talk about an example of each of these two ways of breaking down silos. So what you're seeing here is the output of an effort in which we work with an international federated nonprofit to help them use their own data. Again, we're just talking about first-party data to better understand those donors. In this case, data is siloed across offices, but often in similar systems used by teams with similar functions. Through standardizing the data and mapping data from these similar systems and similar functions to one common data model, we are able to enable easy apples to apples analysis. But another benefit of this is that these standardized data sets are now documented and ready for analysis by all team members. In this case, no real new data is generated, but it's just providing a different way of looking at existing data that makes it more accessible and usable across the organization. Oftentimes, just achieving a single source of truth about donors is an important first step towards data-driven donor management. Another example is in the second case I was talking about, a way of combining different data sets to provide new insights. These could be across teams or perhaps even within a team, but looking at the holistic picture of your donors. In this case, we worked with a research and advocacy organization who wanted to understand what drove traffic on their website as one source, social media accounts as another source, and emails as a third source. We helped them pool these data sources to evaluate how their outreach was working comprehensively and enabled them to use this analysis to develop a more engaging content strategy. So to recap on first-party data is a great asset, oftentimes one of the most valuable assets you have in learning about how your donors interact with your organization. Yet, as you progress on a data-driven journey, silos are likely to be one of the biggest challenges to building a single source of truth or 360-degree view of those donors. But from a data perspective, you can think about breaking down silos by standardizing and documenting existing data sets, as well as identifying opportunities to join data sets that may have a common link. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Anna to talk through our next data type.
Thank you, Ben. As Ben was saying, there's so much value in first-party data, the data you have about the people that you know best, because it's a great way to know how they're interacting with your organization. In this next section, we'll be discussing survey research, which is helpful when you want to learn about the general public or people who are not yet involved with or aware of your organization, or when you're interested in opinions or sentiments which don't always correspond with actions that you can track and measure. There are so many resources out there that share results from surveys and public polling, and we wanted to take a few minutes to touch on a few of them here. For example, if you're interested in demographic or sociographic information, particularly in specific geographies, the American Community Survey, which the Census Bureau conducts every year, is a great resource within the United States. There are also several organizations that make their research publicly available across a wide range of topics. Pew Research Center is one that we consult often. SurveyMonkey publishes some of their surveys. And to give a little plug for our own work, Civis has been running a tracker since the beginning of the pandemic about the impact on Americans, which is updated with our latest research monthly and up for anyone to access on our website. Lastly, one last group, news publications often share research on hot button relevant topics. Examples include The Upshot from the New York Times, the Nonprofit Quarterly, as well as National Public Radio. When looking at public polling results, it can be hard to know if the results are right or if it's useful for you, for your strategy or outreach. Besides considering the trustworthiness of the source, here are some other things to consider. First, look at how the survey was conducted. How recent or not recent is the data? Sometimes a finding from 10 years ago could still be relevant, but another times data from a year ago could be out of date. Look for information on who was surveyed. Who were they asking? How many responses did they get? How were those people reached? Is the population they surveyed one that's of interest to you? And would it make sense that the findings are applicable to other populations as well? You want to be wary of any survey that doesn't have many responses, or if the way in which responses were requested could have introduced bias in the results. For example, if they were only asking the questions of someone who already interacted with them. Second, look for, if you can, the exact question and response wording. Was the wording clear? Were there caveats included or maybe not included that would change the way that people responded? And also, are there any responses that you can think of that should have been included that weren't? Because that could also affect how people respond. Lastly, if you still have questions, it's always worth trying to contact the author or the organization to ask for more information. We occasionally get these kinds of requests for research that we make public, and we always do our best to provide clarification. That said, there are times when publicly available polling won't be able to provide what you need. And this is often when our clients reach out to us for help. Doing a custom polling project is more costly and more time intensive than something you could find online. But it provides what you need when you're looking for up-to-date information or you want answers to questions that you can't find that anyone else has asked, or you're interested in a particular segment of the population or a geography that you don't think is like the rest of the population. When you're doing a custom polling project, make sure you work with an organization that understands what you're looking for and can provide the expertise that you need. Ask them how they'll ensure that the survey results are representative of the population you're interested in, especially if it's a niche population, like public school teachers, for example. They should also have an approach that collects responses that are as representative as possible, and also adjust for sampling error because they'll be collecting a few hundred or thousand responses in order to say something about a population that could include millions of people. And unless you're already experienced in survey and questionnaire design, you'll want to look for an organization that can provide expertise in that area so that they can help you make sure that questions are written in a way that you actually get the answers that you're looking for, and to ensure quality responses so that the responses that you get are truthful rather than people just making selections to get through a survey. As an example of when you might use a custom poll and what that would look like, we worked with a client who focuses on refugees to use survey research to refine their fundraising strategy in the lead up to World Refugee Day last year. We helped them design and field a survey to understand the baseline support and awareness for refugee issues, which then informed their strategy for that day, as well as their plan for the next few years. Just to switch gears a little bit, we also use surveys quite often as a tool for message testing, which is a head-to-head test of videos, images, or text to see which is the most effective in influencing the outcome you care about. We aren't aware of any free tools for message testing in surveys, since it is usually custom work, but we did want to flag that it is similar in methodology to A/B testing, which you might be familiar with in the context of website design, emails, or direct marketing. Though there are certainly paid tools for A/B testing and they make the process easier, it is something that you can set up through your existing infrastructure with some careful planning. So you can see the impact of changing the image and highlighted fact in an email, for example. To just talk through what this process will look like, all message tests, whether they're run in a survey or in an email or website A/B test, are experiments, and there are clear guidelines on the design of a good experiment, which is often referred to as the randomized controlled trial. To be totally upfront, we could go into a lot of detail here. I can and have hosted multiple hour trainings on how to properly execute a message test. But today, I'm just going to spend a few minutes going over the basics, and I'm borrowing here a slide from our Creative Focus tool, which gives a great overview of the message test design. So starting at the top, first, you'll want to find a group of people that's representative of the population you're interested in. In our surveys, that could be 3,000 survey takers in the state of Illinois. Or in the case of A/B testing, it could be all visitors to your website over the next 3 days. Second, you want everything else about the experience to be as similar as possible so that you're really just measuring the difference of the particular test that you're trying to do. In a survey, that means that everyone sees the same questions leading up to the creative you're testing. In an email, it means you want to keep all of the elements of the email the same. Third is our actual test. So in a survey, we randomly split the sample into groups. So one group is our control, who sees no message, and each of the other groups sees one of the test messages. And then finally, we wrap up with our outcome. So in a survey, that might be a question that we ask at the end, or it might be an action that we offer. So for example, do you support this policy? Or will you share this on social media? Or please click this link to sign the petition, where we can then track the number of clicks and successful signing on the back end. If you're thinking about A/B testing on email or a website, this might be clicks to your website or to another page. If that seems pretty straightforward, then great. The most critical thing about any test is that the plan and design are set up front. So make sure you think through ahead of time what the key metrics or outcomes are, what messages or formats you want to test, and who your target population is. All those elements are difficult to change on the fly and impossible to change after the fact, and each element affects what the design of your test should be. When you're deciding on key metrics or outcomes, this is a good time to consult with others in your organization. Understand what they care about at the end of a successful campaign, and think about how you can measure it. If it's something that you can't measure easily, like awareness, you might want to pick an intermediate outcome that is measurable, like likes on social media or shares on social media, which are measurable and do lead to greater awareness. When you're deciding what you want to test, what messages or formats, think about the extensibility of what you're testing. Is the message something you'll use in multiple formats, or something you'll be using to inform a larger campaign? And how would you go through the steps of doing that? Changing one aspect at a time means that you can understand the impact of that particular change. Whereas if you change multiple things, you might then afterward be trying to back out whether it was one particular aspect of that change or a combination of factors that led to the result that you saw. And lastly, make sure that the options stand out from each other. If they look really similar to you, they're going to look similar to your test participants as well. And finally, randomization is the key to a valid statistical test, so it's critical that this is done correctly. Each of the groups, your control and your treatment groups, has to be statistically representative, and random assignment is the easiest way to ensure that. If you're not sure or just want to double check, we recommend checking against different attributes that you have available and making sure that each of the groups is proportionally represented by each of those attributes that you're looking for. Just to share an example of message testing in action, last year we worked with the state of Illinois to design and field a test that looked at different approaches to a public awareness campaign around mask wearing. We found that comparing mask wearing to wearing helmets or seatbelts is particularly effective in increasing compliance with mask wearing, increasing the likelihood of a person wearing a mask by 3 percentage points. As you can see, survey research is a powerful tool for donor management, providing insight into how people think and feel in a way that you can't necessarily capture in other data sources, as well as being a vehicle for message testing to inform how you want to approach a campaign or an outreach strategy. We hope the tips and best practices we shared are helpful for you the next time you're using surveys. to ensure that you're using trustworthy and relevant information to guide your decisions. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Ben to discuss third-party data and modeling.
Thanks, Anna. So survey research can be a really helpful tool, as Anna said, to understand the attitudes and opinions in the environment in which you're operating. Another tool for that is third-party data. And third-party data is valuable when you might want to ask questions that you can't necessarily answer with your first-party data, but do it with a little bit more precision of your existing donors. So third-party data is valuable because it provides additional context about your existing donors or new donors as well. What is third-party data? Simply put, third-party data is typically demographic, psychographic, or behavioral data, usually at an individual level that is aggregated and sold by various data providers. An example of this that you might be familiar with could be a wealth model. Third-party data is valuable in that it can supplement or enhance first-party data in areas where you might not necessarily have fields for your donors through your first-party data. Understanding a little bit more about your first-party data and existing audience can identify opportunities to expand your audience, as well as highlight new audiences. And like I was saying, third-party data can also increase the precision of your outreach and your campaigns. So let's talk about an example and when to use third-party data. When it comes to donor management, you can use third-party data to check assumptions that you have about your donors. Based off of those assumptions, you can develop content and engagement strategies. Identify growth opportunities with either your existing donors or new donors, and that's a key aspect of third-party data. You can prioritize where and how to invest your time based off of those learnings. And as well, understand progress to goals that you might have. An example of this is an environmental advocacy organization that uses Civis data to supplement its first-party data. This additional information helps them check their assumptions, fill in gaps, and add granularity to the first-party data, especially looking across channels. Understanding who your supporters are helps you better engage with them, but it also helps you understand a baseline of where you are now versus where you might want to be, as well as what are key avenues for getting there. Now, you might not always have access to third-party data, so though it's not technically third-party data in the definition that I just shared, we did want to share a free resource typically that is available and can often be a good proxy for third-party data, which is geographic data. You can think of geographic data as things like census results or results from the American Community Surveys or even city open data portals. Lots of geographic data is free and available, aggregated at various geographic levels, things like zip codes, counties, census tracts, etc. And the key point here is, so long as you know the corresponding geography for your donors, let's say you have a zip code from a billing address, you can use the geographic data in your analysis. Geographic data can be very helpful if you don't have third-party data available, like I said, but you may even consider using it when you do have third-party data available. For example, you may have third-party data that has an educational attainment flag that you've mapped back to your donors, but you have reason to believe that it might not be the most reliable flag. One option could be to instead look at the percent of individuals in a census tract that have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree and use that as a proxy for educational attainment. Finally, in a webinar about data-driven donor management, we'd be remiss to not mention modeling. And that's because third-party data enables modeling efforts in support of donor management. Like message testing and like breaking down data silos, modeling too could be the subject of a whole nother webinar. But for a quick crash course, a model is used to predict the likelihood of an unknown phenomena, such as say whether a one-off donor could be a good candidate to become a sustaining donor. A well-trained model increases targeting accuracy, which has a handful of positive outcomes. One might be more efficiently reaching existing fundraising goals, or being able to grow donations with existing or new audiences. Also, models can lead to a better donor experience because you are targeting the right ask to the right person. Now, where does third-party data come into play here? Third-party data often provides additional features that you can use in modeling. So while your first-party data may include things like transactions, donations, actions, sometimes it's helpful to have additional information about who your donors are in order to build high-fidelity models. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you will also want to use only first-party data for your modeling. And that's because you need to have the same data available for both your known universe as well as your target universe. Like I said, modeling could be the topic of a whole nother webinar, but we did want to call out that there are many free open source data science tools available. But in order to use these and to leverage modeling, it's important to first break down those silos and prepare your data, whether you're using third-party data, first-party data, or both. Lastly, just to share an example of how modeling can help in your donor management. In addition to helping you better understand modeling and third-party data, that is, in addition to helping you better understand your existing universe, you can use third-party data to identify new individuals. One way to go about this is through lookalike modeling, where you can use machine learning techniques to identify individuals who essentially resemble those in your current universe. Here, third-party data is serving as a bridge between your existing universe and new universes. By identifying better targets, you can expect to see higher conversion rates. What you're looking at here is a graph that highlights the performance of a lookalike model Civis built for a large performing arts venue to help grow their audience and donors. By focusing on the top scored targets, they were able to bring in new audience members at a higher rate. Ultimately, reaching high quality targets with the right messaging, as Anna was discussing, is a winning combination in donor management. With that, I want to provide a quick recap of some of what we shared for best practices in data-driven donor management. We first talked about first-party data. A key point with first-party data is even if you aren't necessarily thinking about it, you likely have a ton of data available to you that with standard tools and a little bit of custom analysis can reveal insights about donors that might not be obvious at first. But it is important to note that first-party data as is only goes so far, and it's important to think about breaking down silos to expand collaboration as well as analysis opportunities. Survey research is a really great tool when you find yourself asking questions that you can't necessarily answer with your first-party data. There are many available tools and resources that share survey research on a variety of topics, but sometimes even those might not have answers to the questions you're looking for, at which point custom polling can provide flexibility, timeliness, and specific answers to your questions. Another key element of survey research is that it is an avenue to test your messages to help make sure that you are going to field and running campaigns with the most impactful messages possible. Another tool that is available, another data set that is available are very many third-party data sets. And those can be used as well to help supplement and enhance your first-party data to build a deeper understanding of who your donors are and what might be opportunities to engage with them. Ultimately, an example end-to-end automated donor member management workflow might look something like this, where you're building two automated pipelines to identify and engage donors. But please don't be disheartened if this seems a long way away. Why? Because achieving data-driven decision-making requires experimentation and iteration. Over time, you may have a goal for more and more decisions to be informed by data. And that might look something like this. That is a great goal, and that's a goal that we're here to help with. But in reality, it's going to look something more like this. Like I said, it requires experimentation and iteration. You can get started or continue to make progress with just the resources and people that you have now, but ultimately achieving a full state of data-driven decision-making, it will be important to have technology to help facilitate your decision-making. It is an important note, however, that technology alone is not a solution. With this, you may be asking, where do I start? We wanted to share some advice for how we think about making data-driven decisions. Importantly, you should start with a clear, self-contained research question or objective. Oftentimes, biting off more than you can chew can take a project from the beginning. Another important criteria is to make sure that whatever analysis you are undertaking is tied to a decision and it is actionable. While it can be great to learn something for the sake of learning it, making sure that it's tied to a decision helps build momentum and confidence in the results. Finally, it's important to consult all stakeholders and establish what those clear decision-making criteria are. What will we do based off the various outputs to ensure that the analysis is actionable? If you're interested in learning more about how to build towards data-driven decision-making, there are a couple resources on our website that can help, both a guide to analytics maturity and building a disciplined data science team. We hope that with these tools, you can build a data-driven strategy around donor and acquisition management. And lastly, before I pass it back to Anna for an exciting announcement, I just wanted to wrap up with what I also hope is a motivating example from NRDC with whom we've worked over the past few years. By partnering with Civis, we've developed a deeper understanding of the interests and motivations of our donors to better tailor our campaign work and develop new avenues to onboard donors. And through these insights, we've been able to develop sustainer modeling to find the best targets and cultivate long-term donor relationships. With that, I will pass it back to Anna.
Thank you, Ben. We are so excited to be launching this new opportunity with you all today as a chance for nonprofits to get data-driven insights for free. Today, we are launching the 2021 edition of our Ask America Anything contest. This is a contest to give away survey research that we've run for several years, and you can see some of our past winners to the right. This year, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're offering 2 awards. One is an opportunity to poll national adults about a topic of your choice, and the other is a chance to test messages that you're currently working on, whether those are videos, images, text, or ideas. In both cases, you'll be working with one of our teams who will provide survey expertise to design questions for you and help ensure that you get quality responses, and it's all free. The application form is open starting today and through March 5th, and you can apply through our website. We'll be sending out a link via email after this, but if you don't want to wait, the URL is at the bottom of the slide. We look forward to reading your submissions and working with 2 organizations on these projects. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Jason to moderate our Q&A and wrap this up.
Anna, Ben, that was outstanding. Thank you. Particularly exciting to hear about the Ask America Anything 21 initiative. So very much interested in seeing how that develops. So all right, with that said, let's move on to the audience questions. Anna, the first question is for you. The audience member asks, you talked about publicly available resources here, but how do we know if those resources are trustworthy?
That's a really great question. I think one thing that we always do and encourage our clients to do is to evaluate and think critically about data. So considering what those publicly available resources are saying and whether that makes sense against your other experience and other findings. And also thinking really critically about whether or not there might be flaws in the methodology. Not to say that results can't be surprising, and that's part of the benefit of leveraging all these different tools is to be able to learn something you don't already know. but definitely always evaluate them and give us make your own decision on whether or not that finding makes sense.
Excellent. Moving on, the next question asks, we don't really have a team of analysts or data scientists to build out these tools. What are ways you recommend we can still be data-driven? Anna, can you handle that one as well?
Sure, thanks. So this is actually a really good point and something that a lot of different organizations struggle with. One of the reasons why we wanted to include survey research in this webinar, and a reason why it's such an important part of the work that we do with our nonprofit clients, is that it's something that's accessible even if you don't have a data team to go through your first party data or the resources to find or license third party data. With survey research, it can be a one-off project. I think in particular, one thing that we've found a lot of success with is the message testing that we touched on. So regardless of having a large data team, you're able to figure out what you really care about and test these messages, which your outreach team is already thinking through. And it's really important and impactful in figuring out how to cultivate your supporters, especially identifying where there might be backlash and you want to avoid a certain message. And you'll know that your larger campaign is going out with a message that you know works because you've already tested it. That said, we also recognize that introducing testing is a bit of a culture shift. It does require some time investment upfront, as well as some resources, but it is such a beneficial step to include into any workflow where you're really testing all of your assumptions and testing what works before making an even larger investment into a campaign.
Thank you. Ben, we'll give this next one to you and give Anna a break momentarily. What barriers do you often see to nonprofits becoming data-driven?
That's a great question. And there are many barriers. They do vary organization to organization. But I think two that come to mind are one, technical barriers, and two, cultural barriers. And let me dive into each one of those. Technical barriers, a lot of nonprofits oftentimes have disparate data sources based on teams, functions, channels. In the organizations we work with, we'll see different systems for donations, for email lists, for SMS, like I was talking about earlier. And the technical challenge is being able to bring all these tools or all these data sources together to build a strong foundation and a strong source of truth in order to start making data-driven decision makings. So I think one of the foundational elements to making data-driven decisions is just starting with understanding how many supporters you have, how they like to interact with you. And that can lead to better goal setting and better engagement strategies. But oftentimes there's a technical barrier there to actually being able to bring all your data sources together to understand those things. I think the second barrier that we see in some form is often cultural. So there can be concern or mistrust about how different data will get used. Something like, if I give you my list, how do I know it won't get spammed? And this is where governance and standards are so important, and ways to go about kind of achieving those or getting all stakeholders together, clearly explaining how and why data will be used. But one of the, I think, recommendations that we often have with the organizations we work with is start with a smaller proof of concept project, because that can go a long way to building trust and momentum and showing the benefits of bringing data together and breaking down some of those barriers and bring everybody on board. But I guess in short, two of the main barriers that come to mind are technical barriers of bringing data together, as well as kind of cultural barriers of getting the buy-in.
Terrific, thanks. We unfortunately are running out of time today, and if we did not answer your question, we will definitely follow up with you directly after the presentation concludes. In the meantime, I want to once again thank Anna and Ben for their compelling insights and perspectives today. I also want to remind everyone that this webcast is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email containing the link. Last but certainly not least, thank you to everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.